Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint this simple palette knife night sky. Yep, I said this is a palette knife painting and simple. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, and then hit that subscribe button if you haven't already so that you can paint with me every week. Now let's get started. All right, today I am starting with a black 12 by 16 inch Frederick's Red Label canvas. You can use a white canvas and just paint it black if you like. Now the only thing I've done to prepare this canvas is to take a spray bottle of water and just mist down the back lightly. And that makes sure that my canvas is very tight. See, it sounds like a drum because the pressure I'm going to put on it with the palette knife is quite substantial. So you want to make sure your canvas is as tight as possible, but also misting down the front with a little bit of water means that my paint will take just a little bit longer to dry, and that's really helpful here. I'm going to start with a palette knife about like this. Whatever you have is perfect. If you don't have this exact palette knife, if you have plastic palette knives, if you're using a piece of cardboard or an old credit card, that's all perfectly fine. Use whatever you have. Now I've got some ultramarine blue here, and I'm going to get a good amount of it. I'm just using Basics, and not because Basics is better for this than Heavy Body, just because I wanted to show you that you can use Basics with palette knife as well. I'm going to come in here and start spreading that, and then kind of scrape it down. You want this first layer to be as thin as possible. Now I know that that color is quite intense right now, but ultramarine is very transparent, so as it dries, it will become less bright. It will become a little bit darker because that black will glow through. Don't worry about covering the entire canvas. No, if parts of that black still show, that's okay. You don't want a lot of texture in this. So see, I've got my knife pressed flat. Let me show you here. You can see that my knife is pressed flat. The entire knife is touching. And that's how you're gonna get a nice smooth canvas. If you see any ridges, like I've got some ridges here, flatten that knife out and just spread it. Just a very smooth layer. And again, like I said, don't worry if you've got little bits of black showing, because as the blue dries, it's going to become transparent anyway. I'm just going to finish covering the majority of this canvas with the blue, and then we'll move on. Especially if you live in an area that's quite warm or dry, make sure that you wet down the back of your canvas a little bit. Don't spray so much water that's running everywhere, just a light mist across the whole back. And that will really help keep your paint wet a little bit longer. I am not going to worry about taking this all the way to the very bottom. Picked up a little white there, that's okay. We're gonna add some anyway. So let's go ahead and do that. So my palette knife still has a little bit of blue on it, but see, it's just a very thin smear. I'm gonna come in and just touch the tip of that white with the tip of my palette knife. Can you see how much is on there? It's not a ton of paint. I'm gonna start right down here at the bottom because I know that's where I want it the brightest. Flat. Put your entire palette knife flat on there, and really just work on spreading it side to side to get rid of texture. Then we can start kind of dragging it up. Now, one thing you want to make sure of when you're doing this is that you go light enough. I know it's hard to make yourself go too terribly light. If you want a night sky, you may tend to keep it on the darker side. But if it's not light enough, you're not going to see your trees later. So there's a little hint of white mixed in with that blue on here, but not much. I'm just gonna kind of take that before I pick up more white and spread it through some of these darker areas to make sure that nothing is that solid ultramarine blue. A little bit more white. All across the bottom here, that flat palette knife to really spread that paint thin. And drag it up a bit. And drag it out here a little. Spread a bit of that lighter color up through here. If you're struggling and you feel like all you're getting is just big blended blobs of color, then I'm gonna guess that you have way too much paint. This paint should be quite thin. Quite thin. See, there's no blobs on there, but I'm just taking it and kind of smearing it throughout. So if you can see where I got a little bit of that lighter color right there, with nothing but that faint smear of paint on the back of my knife, that should tell you that you really don't need a lot of paint to get these colors moving and covering. Get a bit up there. You know what? I think I'm going to grab a little quinacridone. Just get a little hint of a purple going on over here, just to break up the color a little. Smear it really super thin. That flat knife, I'm really putting some elbow grease into there. So your arms should be a little sore after you're done with this part. You should have a good tired arm. Let's get the tiniest point of white. You see that? It's like a pinpoint. And that might be too much. Let's see. I'm gonna put some in here where I added that quinacridone. Just lighten it a little bit so you can tell that there's a bit of purple in there. I think that was about perfect. Little pinpoint more. There we go. Just kind of keep playing with those colors. I have not gone as light as I'm gonna go, especially not in the middle. Just pull a bit of that into there. Let's see, maybe we'll when you're doing this, it's really important that you use less paint than you think you need. Use a lot less paint than you think you need. In fact, if you think, I don't need that much paint, I want you to use even less than that. So if you come into here and you're like, I need that much paint, then I want you to wipe some off and use that much. The tiniest bits of paint. You can always get more paint, but if you get too much, see, that was way too much. If you get too much, you're gonna have to fight with it. Actually, no, I can spread that out pretty good. It's not too bad. You're gonna have to try and cover it if it's too much paint, and it's just gonna make it harder. See that amount that I wiped off right here? I'm still going back into that. It will take you a long way. And see, all of this is still wet because I wet down the back of my canvas. All right, I'm gonna take a clean paper towel and just wipe that off because I'm gonna start really brightening up the center. A little bit of white, maybe I'll wipe some of that off. Down here at the bottom, where I want it the brightest. And you don't have to completely smear out. See, I've got a little bit of a white line. It's a little bit more distinct in there. You don't have to completely blend this out. especially right here in the middle where it's going to be the brightest. It's going to be really interesting if you leave some edges that are just a little bit more solid. Take a hand in there, pull that up and down. So my pressure is flat. My palette knife is completely flat, but my pressure is very light, barely touching the canvas. Just always smearing off some of that lighter color into different areas. Make this look like whatever you want. I'm going a little bit for kind of that Milky Way type shape, but you don't have to do that. You could just kind of scatter it if you like. And if you want to get your fingers in there and smear the paint with your fingers instead, I know sometimes some of you guys get frustrated with the palette knife. Use your fingers. That's okay. Full contact painting is always acceptable. In fact, I'm sure I'll do a little finger blending later because I always do. I feel like we're getting there. I'm just still blending tiny hints of this lighter color throughout. That was a little intense. If you get a spot like that that's a little too bright, just grab a bit of your darker color and blend it over top of it. You can even dunk your palette knife into a little bit of water and then go at it flat. So I dunked this in a little hint of water. That's probably too much, it's kind of running. I'm just gonna soak off a bit of that water. Flat pressure. And that helps kind of blend it a little. If your palette knife is too wet, you're really gonna get some like kind of weird squiggly marks. Let's just keep brightening, particularly down here and then going up the center. Because we want a nice bright horizon. If our horizon is too dark, then it's really not going to show off much of any of our trees and our ground. That was just a tiny point of white, so I could really concentrate it there. Even a little bit less, little pinpoint. Let's get that going up in here. Flat pressure. Pinpoint again. Just keep going back and forth, adding your color until it looks like what you want it to look like. I feel like I might be getting pretty close to what I want. Don't worry about canvas texture, which is one of the charms of using a palette knife. Some of that texture of your canvas might start showing. Now down here at the bottom, where I'm really brightening it, my paint is getting a little thick, so I do have to make sure that I'm not using too much pressure. I'll gouge into it. I'm gonna blend that spot out, so I need to wipe that off. Flat, heavy pressure. There we go. The lighter your pressure is, the more texture of the canvas is gonna show. The heavier your pressure is, the more smeared it's gonna look. Just gonna get a little bit more quinacridone in a couple of spots, and then I feel like I might be done with this part. Hopefully you can see that quinacridone. I know when these colors are super dark like that, it can be hard to distinguish, and I have a little bit of a glare going on up here. It's kind of the nature of working on a black canvas when you're recording, is struggling with glares. Pinpoint. There we go. All right, now I'm going to take my 1/2 inch flat brush, wet it really good in my jar, and just kind of shake off an extra drip. Don't wipe it. I'm going to come over to my white paint, pull out a bit, and mix the water in my brush with that white paint. You don't want it flowing all over the place, which is kind of what it's trying to do right now, but you want a nice thin mixture of white paint. Let's see. It's flowing a little bit, but that's not too bad. I think that should be good. I'm going to hold it like this and just flick with the tip of my finger. I'm going to kind of concentrate my stars in the lighter areas. So see, that ends up lightening it a little bit more. If I feel like it wasn't bright enough right there, just get it nice and close and put a good amount of stars right there. But I do want stars everywhere. If I get a star that's weird, I'm just gonna kind of tap that with the tip of my finger. And then I get like this cool little, like misty nebula looking spot. Sometimes I like to do that on purpose. I'll tap in some, or I'll splatter some stars that are too bright or too big, and then just kind of tap them out. Don't smear, don't wipe. Zoom you in there a little bit so you can really see how I'm kind of compacting those stars. And if I get a little splatter, see, I love that look. I feel like it makes it look a little bit more realistic. You do want some stars across the entire canvas. Especially in the areas that are really dark, and especially down toward this bottom half, because we want our trees to show up. So let's go really light right here. Lots of stars, lots of big stars. And I'm still just using that first load of white paint. I have not picked up any more. A fast flick like that really gets some big stars and gets them moving. And a much softer, slower flick gets a nice fine mist, very little stars. I always hear whenever we do stars, somebody always says, oh, I got a little carried away. I have too many stars. I don't think you can. I don't think there's such thing as too many stars. I did pick up just a tiny bit more because I want some really, there we go, right across the bottom here. Whoa, that got a little crazy. I think that that's okay. So, you know, don't freak if something like that happens. Because, you know, I mean, if you're not able to tap it like I'm doing here to make it look like a little nebula looking bit, you can always just put your tree over it, or you can leave it, let it dry completely, come back and just palette knife over it again. I think it's okay, actually. I'm not worried about it. In fact, I might see if I can. Yeah, I think it's all right. See, there's no such thing as too many stars. All right, let's do the ground. This is all still wet, so it will pick up with my black. I'm gonna stick with my 1/2 inch flat and load up with some black. Just use the tip to carve out the horizon. See how it's kind of pulling some of that color in? That's perfectly okay, because it can kind of look like light reflections. One thing I'm not doing here is I'm not trying to get a perfect blend. If I've got some little black lines, you know, some little lines where the black is stronger, that's okay. Just fill in this whole bottom. You can even come in and grab a little hint of white with the tip of the brush. Just kind of scratch in some highlights in there. I'm going to take my number 10 round, I wet it in the jar, and I'm going to get some black, and let's start doing some trees. I'm not going to get too carried away and do a ton of trees. You can do as many as you like. So I'm going to just start somewhere, keep my trees a little taller on the edges than in the middle. Very light pressure, and just bring that straight down. See how I've got my pinky on the edge of my canvas? That helps me get a straight line. Very light pressure. I know you can't see this. I'll demonstrate for you where you can see in a second. I'm just kind of tapping with the tip of my brush, back and forth, to make little tree branch shapes. So like this. So there's my tree trunk. Just light taps back and forth. Don't get too mechanical with it. You know, maybe leave like a little spot where there's not a branch over there. Something like that. That's what I'm doing here. And actually, this is still pretty wet, this background. I don't want my trees to be too light and blend in with the background, so I think I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'll come back and finish the trees. Okay, my canvas is pretty dry now, so I'm gonna make sure that this tree is nice and dark. There's really a million ways you can do, you know, trees like this. You could use a fan brush if you like. You can use any brush you're comfortable with. My real piece of advice for doing trees like this is not to make them look too mechanical. And by mechanical, I mean, you know, don't come down like this and dot, 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 so that everything is, you know, you don't want these chevrons. You don't want your tree to be like that. That's way too mechanical. Really kind of, you know, sporadic. Comes out over there, comes out over there, maybe it'll come out over here a little bit, you know, just general. You want to be very general. Putting a little bit more pressure as I get over this way. So the brush stroke I'm doing, we've done this before, it's like a bounce. Okay, so I'm not like dotting, I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm doing. I'm kind of not removing my brush from the plate. So the tip of the brush leads, it's kind of a bounce, scoot over. See, the tip of my brush never comes off. So that's pretty much what I'm doing, kind of quickly like that. See, and I feel like I could have gone even lighter on the background. It's not too bad, but I could have gone lighter. all the way to the ground there. And then just lightly with the tip of my brush, just kind of smear it in. I'm going to do a couple more with this brush on the other side, taking care to make each of my trees just a little bit of a different height. Maybe we'll take this one up a little higher. Not that you can really see up there because it's pretty dark, but that's okay. Little bounces all the way down. Every once in a while, skip a section. Let there be like a little empty spot. See that? How it's totally empty in there? Sometimes these trees, you know, they grow asymmetrically, or maybe the snow really piled up on it one winter and broke one of the branches off. But these trees, they do not grow perfectly symmetrical. So don't paint them perfectly symmetrical. One more over here, quite a bit shorter. I'm really just drawing that line so that I know where to go. I'm not trying to make like a specific trunk because I'm really covering it. I like to use this brush because as I push down, the bristles kind of fracture and give me a little bit of that branch type look. Oops, there we go. All the way down. Now I'm going to go to my number 5 round brush, and I'm going to make a couple more trees with this one. Much shorter, much more distant. I want them to look like they're a little more distant. But really I'm going to do the same thing. So hopefully you can see a little bit better here now. Just light little taps. See, my brush isn't really bending, it's just the tip of the brush. A little heavier pressure as we get to the bottom. And smooth it out. We can even make tiny little trees in the distance. We'll put one right here, pretty much right up against this tree. Just generally tap in. Maybe it's a little tree, maybe it's just much more distant. Either way, it just kind of breaks everything up a bit. And maybe we'll put one right here. Now let's go a little bit taller. Just get rid of some of that highlight. I feel like it would be blocked by that tree. All right, the last thing I'm gonna do is put a little shooting star. I'm gonna go to my palette knife that looks like this. Don't get too much paint here. I'm just gonna come in and get a little bit, really just right on that edge. Tap a little bit of it off. I'm gonna put the point right on that star, lay the edge flat, and just scrape. And if I didn't get enough, I can do it again. And then I'm going to sign it. I hope you enjoyed using the palette knife to create this night sky. I've been in kind of a palette knife funk for a while and haven't done a lot of palette knife paintings, but this one may have kind of encouraged me to seek out new ways to use the palette knife so that we can work on a few more palette knife videos, so stay tuned for that. Thank you again to my sponsor Fredericks, who provided the awesome black canvas that I used in today's painting. And thank you as always. I'll see you next time.